Hey guys, it's Matthew here. I'm just doing sort of a running director's commentary on each episode of the series, trying it out as a new segment. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So this is the first episode, obviously. At the time, it was the only one. I made it just sort of on a whim. Here's the original version, which never made it online. But, I'm not sure what possessed me to go back and sort of clean it up and make it better, but I did. And then I posted that on Reddit at midnight. And then when I woke up in the morning, it had 17,000 upvotes. A lot of people saying, you used Russian bots to get this popular. How did this happen? And so to me, that was a really good indication that, I'd sort of tapped into something fun and good. So that compelled me to make the rest of the series. I have a sort of long history of making other comics, more serious sort of graphic novel kind of stuff, which, never really got very far in the long term. But with this, because I'd made something that was sort of easy to make and I thought I could get them out quickly, and I did, I saw the opportunity, so I took it. So it was a mix of sort of good luck and the experience of having started a few things and them sort of burning out to compel me to make swords. And the fact that it was called Swords was the only reason that the next episode was a sword in the stone type joke, and that sort of began the theme of everything being kind of connected but being their own separate jokes, but always bound together by the concept of a sword. This episode, very straightforward. It's a sword in the stone joke. He breaks the sword. Plenty of people have complained over the years that there should have been a tang in there. I don't care. It's a joke. At the end of the day, jokes should always win out over logic in this series. So the third episode, I am not afraid to admit that Kargob is inspired by Sithrak from the Oglaf comics. Oglaf and Nendroid were two big comics which inspired me to make this series. But this is just a really straightforward joke that I still think is one of the best ones. And it sort of introduced the concept of Kargob and the gods and all of that sort of stuff. And because Xiphos has the 6 eyes on his helmet, and Kargob has the 4 eyes and the glasses, those were a deliberate choice to sort of have him not familiar with the true face of his god, which just carried over into the rest of the series. So this episode is a bit controversial, I suppose, because by the time everything else started coming together and I formulated the plot, there was no plot at this point. You have to understand, I was just making episodes. This was day 4 of this project and the 4th comic. I don't really know what compelled me to make goblins so different from the norm. I just felt like I wanted it to be more of a sort of Warhammer-esque kind of world with, things wearing skull hats and, stuff like that, Diablo-esque, which, didn't really pan out in the end because it is a more comical sort of series. There's sort of a bit of both. The goblin just ended up being this furry thing with hooves and a skull mask, and he does look quite different to how he looks now. He got a bit softer in his appearance over time. I was just sort of riffing. But then this ends up being a really important plot point later on when the story comes together. And I guess what's controversial about it is that it's so early in the series that it just throws people way off when they try to read it in its release order. I've sort of juggled with the idea many times of simply removing it from release order and placing it way later on, just so people kind of grasp better how it relates to everything else, because it throws people off all the time. They don't get it. And also everyone thinks Joy is a man in this comic, so maybe I need to go back and accentuate some of her characteristics. So this is the 5th comic. It's the first time we see The king grown up. You can't really tell from this episode because he's not holding his wand out, but it is intentional that he is that young king, and now he's gone to, from episode 2, and now he's gone to war with Xiphos from episode 3. So this all came together on purpose. And you'll see he's got the 8-eyed brooch because I'd already decided at this point that it was a war between two faiths of the same god, but with different perspectives on what he is and what he's doing. And there are shields in this episode, which people always seem to forget when they ask me later on why there are no shields throughout the series. Episode 6, it's just a really straightforward riff on the Lord of the Rings. This is Stabbins the Fawn and Stroller. Stroller is sort of an amalgam of Oberyn from Game of Thrones and Strider from Lord of the Rings. Hence Stroller, because he's the sort of more laid-back version of Strider. A lot of people say he's dressed like Aquaman. It's not intentional. It just sort of, it was a shorthand kind of look. So this episode is another one of those ones that's a little bit out of place chronologically. It's quite far in the future. It introduces Smith the blacksmith and his son Edge, who is a half human, half sword. It's the first time in the series that sword hybrids get introduced, so it's kind of where things start to get a little more absurd with the premise. Everything else was fairly grounded in dark fantasy before that. There's another shield in this episode if you didn't notice that. But Edge ends up being a quite underutilized character, but I'll get to that later on, I think. So this is actually the second version of the art for this episode. I'll throw up the other one now. But basically, this episode got a remastering in the end because once I had a website and I was able to look at analytics, I found that this is the episode where people stopped reading, even though there were lots of episodes after that. And while I didn't fully determine whether it was the quality of the episode art-wise, or whether it's because it's the first episode with two girls talking to each other, or because people naturally sort of get weary after 7 or 8 episodes and they need a break. For whatever reason, updating the artwork seemed to do the trick, because that problem went away and it stopped being a point where lots of people stopped reading. Because I did this episode remastered so much further in the future than the others, this is weirdly got the Swords font instead of being handwritten like the ones you've seen already. So it's a little bit of a jump and then reverts back to the old style, which makes it a little jarring, I suppose. But this episode generally has been quite popular. It gets shared a lot. That's about it. Episode 9, not much to say about that really. It's just another riff on the Lady of the Lake. So we've done Sword in the Stone and Lady of the Lake. The Lady of the Lake in this case being secretly a giant anglerfish. I've always enjoyed drawing anglerfish monsters, so this was just sort of me being me, with a pretty straightforward joke, which comes back later. And then this episode 10, basically just lampoons the sort of swords taken to absurd levels premise back the other way, where the characters sort of naturally assume the world is sword-shaped, as many of my readers do constantly, and sort of throws it back in the reader's face and says, no, it's round, obviously. It's also the first time that you see an 8-eyed believer's perspective on what Kargob looks like, introduces the leather jacket concept, which comes back a few times. That's it. It's pretty straightforward, reverse Uno kind of moment. And that's it for today's episode. We'll look at episodes 11 through 20 next time. Thanks.